His friends, other young artists like himself, tried to console him, but they too were facing the same hurdles. It wasn't just about skill, it was about being accepted into a world that seemed built for a very specific kind of artist, one that didn't look like him. But Malik didn't give up. Every rejection was a fire that fueled him. He knew that to get the recognition he craved, he would need to break through the barriers that seemed to limit him. He studied art history, read about successful artists who had faced similar struggles, and networked tirelessly. Slowly, he began to make small strides. His work was featured in local cafes and small exhibitions, but he longed for something bigger. He longed for a breakthrough that would elevate him to the level of the artists he admired. The gallery encounter. Malik had heard of Mr. Thornton's gallery from a fellow artist who had made a name for himself there. Thornton's gallery was one of the most prestigious in the city, and being featured there could change everything for Malik. He had heard the rumors. Thornton was known for having a sharp eye for talent, but he also had a reputation for being ruthless when it came to rejecting artists. It took Malik several months to get the courage to walk into the gallery. His friends encouraged him to do it, telling him that he had nothing to lose. With a portfolio under his arm and a nervous stomach, Malik walked through the polished glass doors of Thornton's gallery. The high ceilings and pristine white walls felt alien to him, like a world he wasn't quite meant to enter. He approached the front desk, where a receptionist greeted him with a polite but indifferent smile. "I have an appointment with Mr. Thornton," Malik said, trying to keep his voice steady. The receptionist raised an eyebrow but nodded, ushering him into a waiting area. Malik sat nervously, shifting his portfolio from one side to the other. He looked around at the art on the walls, the sleek and polished pieces that adorned the gallery. They were beautiful, yes, but they felt distant from his own work. His art was raw, emotional, sometimes jarring, nothing like the calculated precision of what hung on these walls. After a few moments, a man appeared at the door. Mr. Thornton was in his late 50s, with neatly combed gray hair and a perfectly pressed suit. He had the air of someone who was used to being in control, to having the final say on what was worthy and what wasn't. "Malik Carter?" Mr. Thornton asked, his voice firm but not unkind. "Yes, sir," Malik replied, standing up and extending a hand. Mr. Thornton shook it briefly before gesturing for Malik to follow him. They walked to a private office at the back of the gallery, and Malik felt a sense of anticipation wash over him. This was it. This was the moment that could change everything. Once seated across from each other, Malik handed over his portfolio, opening it to reveal his latest pieces, each one a representation of the struggles and triumphs he had experienced in his life. He spoke passionately about his work, explaining the stories behind each piece and the emotions they were meant to convey. But as he spoke, Mr. Thornton's expression remained unmoved. He didn't seem to react to the power behind the work, the vulnerability that Malik had put into each brushstroke. Instead, he simply flipped through the pages, his face betraying no emotion. After a few moments of silence, Mr. Thornton placed the portfolio down on his desk and looked Malik directly in the eye. "Your work is interesting, Mr. Carter," he said, his tone dismissive. "But it's not the kind of thing we're looking for here. It's a little too intense. Too political. You see, art is meant to elevate. People don't want to be confronted with harsh realities when they come to a gallery. They want to be entertained. Your work, while it has potential, just doesn't fit." Malik's heart sank. He had heard these kinds of words before, but hearing them from someone like Thornton felt like a punch in the gut. The art world had always been exclusive, but this felt like something more, something deeply personal. "I understand," Malik said quietly, though inside he was burning with anger and frustration. "Thank you for your time." As he left the gallery, the weight of rejection felt unbearable. But this time, something inside him clicked. He wasn't going to let one man's opinion define his worth. He wasn't going to let the art world shut him out just because his style didn't conform to its narrow standards. Malik's determination. That night, Malik sat in his studio, staring at his latest work, a piece he had poured everything into, a vibrant representation of the struggles of Black identity in America. He felt the sting of rejection, but he also felt a renewed sense of determination. If the gallery owners didn't want to see his work, fine. He would find another way. He would study the art market. He would learn the business. He would show the world that his art wasn't just something to be hung on a wall, it was something that had the power to change the world. The road ahead would be tough, but Malik was ready to rise above the prejudices, to prove that his voice, his vision, was just as valid as any other. The world had yet to see the full extent of what Malik Carter was capable of. But that was about to change. The rise to fame. Malik's growth as an artist. After the harsh rejection from Mr. Thornton's gallery, Malik Carter's resolve only grew stronger. He took the sting of the experience and channeled it into his work. Determined to make a name for himself, he doubled down on his craft. The walls of his small studio became a playground of colors, shapes, and emotions. He spent hours upon hours perfecting each stroke, pushing the boundaries of his own creativity. No longer was he trying to fit into a world that had rejected him, he was now creating for himself, and if others didn't understand it, that was their loss. In the months that followed, Malik became more methodical in his approach. He studied the work of other successful artists, not to imitate them, but to learn from them. He dissected the art market, understanding what made certain works successful, what appealed to collectors, and what kinds of themes were currently popular. It wasn't about compromising his vision, it was about finding ways to make his unique style more accessible without losing the authenticity that made his work powerful. At first, Malik found success on a smaller scale. He began selling his pieces online, showcasing them on art platforms and social media. It was slow going, but the more he posted, the more his work gained attention. Local art fairs and exhibitions became his proving grounds, where he met like-minded artists and collectors who shared his passion for innovation and diversity in the arts. While he was far from a household name, the art world began to notice Malik's distinctive voice. Malik's online presence grew steadily, and through a combination of networking, word of mouth, and sheer persistence, he began to sell more and more pieces. His works, which once sold for modest prices, began to fetch higher sums as people started recognizing the value of his art. He made enough money to upgrade his materials, buy larger canvases, and expand his studio. What had once been a cramped corner of his apartment transformed into a space fit for a growing artist with big ambitions. But despite these small victories, Malik knew he had to keep pushing. He wanted more. He wanted the kind of recognition that only came from the top galleries, from collectors willing to pay millions for his work. He knew he wasn't there yet, but every piece he sold, every new follower he gained, was a step closer to his ultimate goal. The breakthrough moment. The breakthrough came one winter evening, when Malik received an unexpected phone call that would change his life forever. It was from a renowned art critic named Lorraine Stevens, whose reviews were highly regarded in the industry. She had seen one of Malik's paintings at a local art fair and was intrigued by the boldness and depth of his work. She wanted to feature him in a piece she was writing for one of the leading art publications, Art Scene. At first, Malik thought it was a prank. He had heard stories of other artists being discovered by critics, but he never thought it would happen to him. His initial hesitation gave way to excitement as Lorraine explained her admiration for his work. The article would not only feature an in-depth analysis of his art, but would also highlight him as a rising star in the art world. The article came out a month later, and within days, Malik's name was all over social media. The praise from Lorraine Stevens was effusive, calling his art a visceral exploration of the African American experience and a much-needed voice in the contemporary art scene. It wasn't long before the article made its way to galleries, collectors, and curators who were eager to meet the man behind the work. Soon after the publication, invitations began pouring in for exclusive exhibitions, from high-profile museums to private collector showings. Malik was suddenly in demand, and the art world that had once ignored him was now eager to embrace him. He received offers to display his work in prestigious galleries, something he had only dreamed of before. Media attention. With each new exhibition, Malik's reputation grew. His work began to feature prominently in major art magazines, websites, and blogs. Journalists clamored to interview him, fascinated by his unique perspective and fearless approach to art. Malik, once an unknown, was now a cultural sensation, attracting attention from art critics, celebrities, and art collectors who were eager to invest in his work. His art began to reach a wider audience as well. Malik's pieces were displayed in New York City's most prestigious galleries, and soon they were being shown in galleries across the world. His art was no longer confined to niche exhibitions, it was now front and center at major events, becoming a symbol of the changing tides in the art world. As the demand for his art grew, so did its value. What had once been sold for a few $1,000s now fetched hundreds of thousands. A single painting could bring in six figures, and some of his larger pieces even sold for over $1 million. Malik's art was not just desirable, it was now seen as a symbol of cultural significance, a valuable asset in the eyes of wealthy collectors and investors. The media was abuzz with talk of Malik's meteoric rise. There were profiles written about him in the New York Times, Vogue, and The Guardian. Documentaries were being made, and his story was featured on Art World podcasts. Malik was being hailed as a trailblazer, a young artist who was changing the face of contemporary art. His success was inspiring a new generation of artists, particularly young Black creators, to believe that their voices had a place in the world of high art. Malik, however, remained grounded. He knew the importance of his work and the legacy he was building, but he also understood that success in the art world could be fleeting. He continued to create, to push boundaries, and to use his platform to elevate other marginalized voices. Mr. Thornton's discovery. While Malik's success continued to grow, it wasn't long before news of his meteoric rise reached the ears of Mr. Thornton. The gallery owner, who had once dismissed Malik's work, heard about his recent acclaim and the skyrocketing prices of his paintings. At first, he refused to believe it. To him, Malik's success seemed like a passing trend, a moment of hype that would soon fade. "I told you the work wouldn't last," Mr. Thornton muttered to himself as he flipped through a report about Malik's most recent exhibition. "It's all noise. A fad." But despite his dismissal, Thornton couldn't ignore the facts. The world was talking about Malik Carter, and his pieces were fetching astronomical prices. The gallery world, which had initially rejected Malik's bold vision, was now clamoring to feature his work. Thornton, ever the businessman, started to rethink his stance. Perhaps he had made a mistake, perhaps he had underestimated the artist's staying power. But his pride kept him from acknowledging the truth. He had passed up on Malik when he had the chance, and now the artist was beyond his reach. Despite this, Thornton still clung to the belief that Malik's success was nothing more than a passing trend. He continued to refer to Malik's work as too political and too controversial for his gallery, convinced that it wouldn't stand the test of time. The art world had seen flashes of success before, he reasoned, and many of those artists had faded into obscurity. He would not make the same mistake again, he would avoid Malik's work altogether, even as the world clamored for it. In a private moment, Thornton looked at the article featuring Malik's rise to fame and let out a sigh of frustration. Deep down, he knew that Malik's success was more than just a trend. It was the beginning of something much bigger. But for now, Mr. Thornton clung to his pride, unwilling to admit the truth, that he had missed his chance to be part of Malik Carter's incredible journey. The art market explosion. Malik's brand. Malik Carter's name had long since become synonymous with revolutionary art. His works, once considered too bold and unconventional for mainstream tastes, had evolved into pieces of immense cultural significance. As his reputation grew, so did the demand for his art, and Malik understood that it was not just about creating pieces, it was about building a brand. He carefully cultivated an identity that was tied to the themes of his work: empowerment, history, and the exploration of identity. Each painting became more than just a visual experience, it was a conversation, a statement, and a challenge to the status quo. Through his use of social media, interviews, and partnerships with prominent cultural organizations, Malik made sure his voice was heard loud and clear. His art was no longer confined to the white walls of galleries, it was now an expression of his soul, seen and revered by collectors, curators, and cultural influencers around the world. Malik was not just an artist, he was a symbol of a new generation of Black creators reclaiming space in a traditionally white-dominated field. His work was an exploration of history and modern-day struggles, reflecting the emotional weight of his personal experiences and those of his community. As his popularity soared, Malik's work found its way into high-end collections. Art investors began to take notice, seeing his paintings not just as expressions of cultural significance, but as valuable assets. His works were now considered rare and important, representing a moment in history that could not be ignored. Malik's brand was solidified as one of authenticity and innovation, and the art market responded in kind. Pieces that had once sold for a few $1,000s were now fetching prices in the hundreds of thousands, and his larger, more intricate works had climbed into the millions. Collectors were no longer simply purchasing art, they were investing in an artist whose influence would only continue to grow. Malik had successfully positioned himself as a trailblazer, and his paintings became symbols of status and cultural awareness. He had achieved what few artists could, his name alone was enough to drive demand, and his art was seen as a representation of not only his talent but the changing tide of the art world. A surprise offer. One crisp autumn morning, Malik received an unexpected phone call that would change his trajectory forever. The voice on the other end of the line was that of Claire Winston, a powerful art investor known for her work with top galleries around the world. Claire had a reputation for discovering emerging talent and making lucrative investments in the art world, and she had been keeping a close eye on Malik's rise. She had watched as his work had grown in both stature and value, and she saw in him an opportunity to further elevate his career while securing a profitable deal for herself. "Mr. Carter," Claire began, her voice steady and confident, "I've been following your work for some time now, and I think you have the potential to be one of the most important artists of your generation. I'd like to make you an offer, one that I believe will allow you to focus on your creative work while also ensuring your place in the history books." Malik's curiosity piqued, and he asked for more details. "I'm interested in acquiring a series of your paintings, your most recent work, the ones that have been gaining the most attention. I'm prepared to make you an offer that reflects the true value of your art. You'll have the financial freedom to focus entirely on creating, while I take care of the business side of things. We can talk numbers, of course, but I think you'll find my proposal more than fair." At first, the offer seemed tempting. The money was substantial, far more than Malik had ever earned for a single piece, and it would give him the kind of financial security that would allow him to focus purely on his art. It was the kind of deal that many emerging artists would jump at, and Claire's reputation in the art world meant that her endorsement would secure his place among the elite. But something about the offer didn't sit right with Malik. He realized that while the deal could guarantee him success, it would also mean giving up control of his work. His art would become another commodity, a product to be sold and traded. Malik didn't want to simply be a creator whose work was bought and sold by wealthy investors. He had come too far, fought too hard, to allow his creations to become just another transaction in the capitalist art market. He wanted more than just money, he wanted the freedom to shape his own path, to define his legacy on his own terms. After much contemplation, Malik made his decision. Instead of selling his work to Claire or any other investor, he would take control of his own career. He would build a foundation that would allow him to create art on his own terms. And to do that, he would need to own the spaces where his art could be showcased. Malik's new direction. In the back of his mind, Malik had always known that one day he would own a gallery. Not just any gallery, but one that reflected the richness and diversity of Black culture and the perspectives that had long been overlooked in the art world. A place where artists like him could find a platform to display their work without fear of rejection or misrepresentation. He began to research galleries that were currently up for sale, and soon, he found one that stood out, Thornton's Gallery. The same gallery where he had been humiliated all those years ago. The very place where his dreams had been crushed by Mr. Thornton's dismissive attitude. the irony was not lost on Malik. He realized that buying this gallery would not just be a business decision, it would be a symbolic act of reclaiming the space that had once rejected him. With the gallery officially in his hands, Malik was no longer an artist struggling for recognition. He was a force in the art world, an owner of one of the most prestigious galleries in the city. But this wasn't just about power or wealth for Malik, it was about creating a space where artists of all backgrounds could come together, share their stories, and be celebrated for their unique contributions to the world of art. Gallery ownership. Malik wasted no time in transforming Thornton's gallery into something new. He renamed it the Legacy Gallery, a place where the voices of marginalized artists could be amplified. He began curating exhibitions that reflected the diversity of the world around him, showcasing works by Black, Indigenous, and people of color artists whose contributions had often been overlooked. He made sure to include emerging voices as well as established ones, giving young artists the opportunity to have their work displayed alongside the greats. The walls of the Legacy Gallery were soon adorned with the works of talented artists from around the globe. Malik's own pieces, now commanding multi-million-dollar prices, took pride of place in the gallery, but he was careful not to let his own success overshadow the voices of others. He used his platform to give back, offering mentorship to young artists and using the gallery's growing reputation to raise awareness about the issues of race and identity that were so central to his work. In a way, buying Thornton's gallery had been a form of poetic justice. The place that had once rejected him was now under his ownership, and it was no longer a place of exclusion, it was a sanctuary for creative expression. Malik had transformed the very space that had once told him he wasn't good enough into a beacon of hope for artists who had been dismissed for far too long. As the Legacy Gallery gained prominence, so did Malik's influence. He became a leader in the movement for greater representation in the art world, and his legacy, not just as an artist but as a trailblazer, was secure. He had proven that with persistence, vision, and a refusal to back down, anything was possible. And in doing so, he had changed the art world forever. The Reckoning. Mr. Thornton's reaction. It had been several weeks since the news broke that Malik Carter had purchased Thornton's gallery, and the ripple effect had been immediate. For months, whispers spread throughout the art world as gallery owners, critics, and collectors learned of Malik's latest triumph. His meteoric rise, which had started with a few small sales, had now taken him to a place where he was not only a celebrated artist but also a major player in the art market. And to everyone's surprise, the gallery that had once rejected him, Thornton's gallery, was now in his hands. The news hit Mr. Thornton like a slap in the face. The man who had once dismissed Malik as a passing trend now found himself in the position of being on the outside looking in. His pride had been wounded, and he had trouble processing what had just happened. Thornton had spent years carefully curating his gallery's image, maintaining an air of exclusivity and elite taste. But now, the very space he had built his reputation on was under the control of the one artist he had once mocked. At first, Thornton tried to ignore the growing realization, dismissing it as a fluke. He believed that Malik's success, while impressive, would ultimately fade. The art world, he thought, was simply a place of trends, and sooner or later, Malik would fall out of favor. But as days turned into weeks, and as Malik's Legacy Gallery gained increasing acclaim, it became clear that Thornton's assumptions had been wrong. Malik had not just proven his worth, he had completely reshaped the landscape. When Thornton first received the letter confirming that Malik was now the owner of the gallery, he was stunned. His gut reaction was one of disbelief, followed quickly by a deep, sinking feeling of regret. The thoughts began to swirl in his mind. I missed it. I could have seen it. I could have been part of this movement. Instead, he had chosen to dismiss Malik's art, to believe that it was nothing more than an impulsive act of rebellion. It didn't take long for Mr. Thornton to accept that his time in the limelight was fading. He had failed to see the potential in the artist who had now become a force in the art world, and he realized that his own legacy would forever be tied to his failure to recognize Malik's brilliance. The confrontation. Weeks after the sale, Malik received a call from Mr. Thornton's assistant. It was an invitation to meet. The gallery owner, now humbled and without his usual arrogance, was requesting a private meeting at the Legacy Gallery. Malik agreed, though he did so with a sense of anticipation. He had long wondered what Thornton's response would be once he realized just how wrong he had been. When the day of the meeting arrived, Malik stood in the middle of his gallery, taking in the beauty of his space, the high ceilings, the modern design, the artworks that told stories of pain, pride, and triumph. He had poured so much into making this place a home for other artists like him, and now, it had become a cornerstone of a revolution in the art world. He wasn't sure what kind of man Mr. Thornton had become, but he knew this meeting would be a moment of reckoning. The door to the Legacy Gallery opened, and in walked Mr. Thornton. The former gallery owner appeared older, wearier, as if the weight of his past decisions was now pressing on him. He looked around, clearly uncomfortable in a space that was once his, now under the ownership of the man he had once rejected. Malik, who stood confidently at the center of the room, greeted him without hesitation. "Mr. Thornton," Malik said calmly, though his voice carried a quiet intensity. "It's good to see you. Please, have a seat." Thornton hesitated but eventually complied, sitting across from Malik. There was a long silence before either of them spoke. The hum of the gallery's atmosphere seemed to amplify the tension between them. "I must admit," Thornton began, his voice lacking its usual bravado, "I never thought I'd be standing here today. When I first rejected you, I had no idea you'd go on to become, well, what you've become. This gallery," he gestured around them, his words trailing off, "I can't believe it's yours." Malik nodded, his gaze steady but not unkind. "I know. It must be difficult, seeing the place you built, the place that once rejected me, now in my hands." Thornton looked down, his hands clasped in his lap. "You were right, Malik. I was wrong. I couldn't see it then. I thought your work was too much, too radical. I was wrong." Malik's lips pressed into a thin line. "That's why I'm here today, Mr. Thornton. I didn't come to gloat or to make you feel worse than you already do. I came here to tell you that this success, this moment, isn't about me proving you wrong. It's about something bigger." Malik leaned forward slightly, his eyes locking with Thornton's. "This wasn't just about me getting back at you. It's about changing the art world. It's about showing that art doesn't belong to just one group of people, that the voices of marginalized artists can, and should, be heard. It's about making sure that young artists who look like me, who think like me, know that they too have a place in this world." Thornton shifted uncomfortably, his face reddening slightly. "I can see that now. I can see how much of an impact you're having. And I regret not seeing your potential earlier." Mr. Thornton's apology. For the first time since their meeting began, Thornton's voice softened. "Malik, I was wrong. I admit that. I underestimated you. I didn't recognize the power behind your work, the message you were trying to send. You were never just an artist, you were a force. And I missed it." Malik listened intently but didn't interrupt. The apology wasn't the grand gesture he might have imagined. It wasn't a dramatic moment of reckoning. Instead, it was a quiet admission, a moment of humility from a man who had been set in his ways for too long. "I was stuck in my own world," Thornton continued, "where certain things were considered worthy and others weren't. I thought I knew better, but you've proven me wrong. You've shown me that art is bigger than just the galleries and the money. It's about giving people a voice." Malik nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Thornton. But this wasn't about me proving you wrong. It was about proving to the world that there's more to art than what they've been taught to accept. You see, there are a lot of people who were never given a chance. Artists who were told that their work wasn't refined enough, that it didn't belong in a major gallery. The truth is, the art world had been excluding voices for too long. That's the real tragedy." Thornton shifted uneasily in his chair, but he could no longer deny the truth of Malik's words. He had spent years creating an environment where the same types of artists were celebrated, and the diverse voices of the art world were pushed aside. "Malik," Thornton said quietly, I want to say I'm sorry. For everything. For not giving you the chance you deserved, for not seeing you for what you truly were. I see it now. I can see why you've come this far. And I truly regret my part in holding you back. Malik's closure. Malik felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about humbling Mr. Thornton or making him feel bad. It was about understanding that the art world had its flaws, but that change was possible. By taking ownership of the Legacy Gallery, Malik had created a space that not only reflected his own journey, but also created opportunities for others to follow in his footsteps. The artist's humble beginnings. Introduction of the protagonist, Malik Carter. The dimly lit studio was a reflection of Malik Carter's life, humble, small, and constantly under construction. Nestled in a quiet corner of an up-and-coming neighborhood in Harlem, his studio was a converted space above an old corner shop. The building's aging walls and creaky floors were the perfect metaphor for Malik's own journey, an artist in the process of crafting not just his pieces but his future. Malik was 27, a black man with a fierce passion for abstract art. His work, vibrant and full of emotion, was often misunderstood by the broader art world, which had a long history of marginalizing artists like him. With each stroke of his brush, Malik poured his heart and soul into creating pieces that explored themes of identity, race, and history. His work was bold, unapologetic, and at times, uncomfortable. He wanted to challenge the viewer's perceptions, to make them think deeply about the world around them. But the world of art wasn't always so receptive to new ideas. Born and raised in a working-class neighborhood in the Bronx, Malik had never been handed an easy path. His mother, a schoolteacher, and his father, a factory worker, had always instilled in him the importance of hard work and perseverance. Yet, no matter how hard Malik worked, he couldn't escape the sting of rejection. His earliest experiences as an artist had been marked by uncertainty, financial struggles, and a constant need to prove himself. From a young age, Malik had dreamed of being a famous artist. He imagined his work hanging in the most prestigious galleries, his name spoken in the same breath as the greats. But as the years passed, that dream had seemed more and more elusive. The art world was notorious for its exclusivity, and Malik's unconventional style, rooted in his own experiences and cultural background, was often seen as too radical, too challenging for mainstream taste. His dream and challenges. Malik's abstract art was far from the traditional portraits and landscapes that most collectors favored. His pieces were a dynamic mix of bright colors, sharp angles, and swirling patterns, all layered with symbolism. He painted about the Black experience in America, about the struggles of his ancestors and the triumphs of his community. His art was more than just aesthetic, it was political, emotional, and raw. Yet, no matter how much heart he poured into each piece, he faced constant rejection. Gallery owners often saw Malik's work as too aggressive, too political, or too out there. Art critics wrote off his pieces as too unrefined, dismissing them as attempts to provoke rather than to create beauty. Malik struggled to understand why his work wasn't resonating with the mainstream, especially when it felt so honest and true to his identity.